Join Lee Bellinger today on The Bellinger Report. Lee is the publisher of Off-Grid Confidential, one of the last information financial newsletters to be delivered 100% through the mail and completely independent of the internet and big tech scolds. Lee has been publishing continuously since 1988 and is your guide to off-grid living.
Hi, this is Lee Bellinger with the Bellinger Report. I'm talking today to Marty Cooper, and this is the man who in the 1970s invented the first handheld cellular mobile phone that was distinct from a car phone. And I want to welcome you today. I do seem to remember the early models that were a big brick. And I was in the 70s, I actually had a car phone. And then, prior to all that, I had it rigged through a ham radio, but it could only call out. But you could actually interface. But it was very, very primitive compared to what there is now, obviously.
Very primitive, as a matter of fact.
Quite primitive, but still pointing to the future. And so thank you for joining me today. I'm very grateful to you. And I guess I want to cut straight to this. You're co-founder of a number of communications companies, and you're the father of the handheld cell phone. That's pretty cool. You don't get to have that conversation every day. And I'm going to begin, Marty, by just asking you how you got started and tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I am an engineer. I went to the Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a wonderful university in Chicago. I was with Motorola for 29 years after serving in the U.S. Navy as a submarine officer. And the culmination of what I did at Motorola was, in fact, getting into a battle with AT&T. This is the old AT&T, the Bell system. You remember them, Lee? The monopoly. They were the equivalent of what Google is today.
They were the equivalent of what Google is today.
And they had come up with an idea that they called cellular, which was going to connect us everybody. And their version of cellular was car telephones. And we at Motorola had already experienced the fact that when you let somebody have communications in their hand where they can move anywhere, that it's a form of freedom that just can't be reproduced. And the fact is that you only spend a tiny bit of your time in a car, and that doesn't do the job at all. So we took AT&T on, and we had a battle that lasted for 10 years between 1969 and 1983. That's actually 14 years. And in 1973, it sounded like the FCC, they're the ones who make the decisions about how the spectrum radio channels will be used, was about to make a decision, and we were worried that they'd make the wrong decision. And that's when I decided that the only way that we can show people that the handheld phone is the future was to actually make one and demonstrate it. And that's exactly what we did on April 3rd, 1973. We actually, over a period of 3 months, I put a team together and they actually built a phone. And if you would let me run downstairs, I could show you what it looked like. I forgot to bring it here.
You have the original?
I have an exact duplicate of the original. And before we finish this thing, if you figure out some way that I can leave for 1 minute, I could actually show it to you.
That'll be great. And so tell me a little bit about how you got involved in wireless communication. Just what was the starting point for you? Was it the Navy, or were you a signals guy in the Navy?
Actually, it was the TwoWay Radio business. It's probably the most unglamorous business you ever could imagine. But two-way radios are how the police operate, and any business that has moving resources uses two-way radios.
Yes.
Whether it's a cement mixer or an appliance, I think if you've got people out in the field, you have to communicate with them. And most people used Motorola radios. They were pressed to talk, when you wanted to talk to somebody, you push a button when you let go. So they're all professionals. They knew how to use this. You could not run a police department without two-way radios. And we discovered, and actually the police are the ones that first got us into this, that putting a radio in a car did only part of the job because people spent their time out of the cars. And in fact, the police superintendent in Chicago, a guy named Orlando Wilson, told us, my police officers should be out with the people. working with people, and instead they're stuck in their cars because we need to communicate with them. Can't you let us set them free? And we did that with handheld two-way radios.
Is that how the repeater got invented? The concept of a low signal picked up by it and rebroadcast like a repeater does?
That was one of the ways that we could bring that service to businesses and people like that, was to use community repeaters. But a police department would have their own transmitters, a big company would have their own transmitters, a plumbing company with two repairmen might use a community repeater, just what you described.
Tell me a little bit about some of your greatest inventions. It sounds like you already gave that information. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Those are big innovations, obviously, as social changes.
Well, I tell you that moving to Motorola was the luckiest thing I ever did, Lee, because I got the first project that I worked on was radio traffic control. We figured out ways to have the stoplights turn green just when a car came close to it. We put telephones out in rural areas using radio, which is one of the products I worked on. I started the radio paging business. You remember what a pager was?
Heck yeah, I remember. Yeah.
You have enough gray hair that you do remember the paging business, which interestingly enough, I put out of business because cellular telephones did everything that pager does, only a little bit better. So I got to work on one step after another in bringing communications to everybody. And I have to tell you that cellular has had a huge influence on life. Everybody in the world uses it. I don't know if you're aware of the fact there are more cell phones in the world than there are people. More cell phones in the United States than there are people. The number of wired telephones is actually going down, and there are only about 50 million wired telephones left in the country. But even with all of those facts, we're only seeing the beginning.
The human species is now on track for collective intelligence.
You know that you are. Now I know why you make the big bucks. You're right.
Well, it's a little like the insect world in a sense. They have a collective intelligence about them, and they function as more of a groupthink. So, it's I don't know that's just one thought about that I had, but especially with the internet, but which was a logical follow-on to the communication.
Well, you got to the heart of it, though, because collaboration is one of the most valuable tools we have in making things progress. Two minds can always do more than one, and getting minds together so they can communicate and collaborate no matter where they are and whatever the time is a huge advancement in society. So we are doing things that we never could imagine doing just because people can collaborate with each other.
Marty, I have a question for you that's kind of unrelated, but it's a parallel question I have, which is, so we've created an artificial ecosystem where in nature, whether it's insects or any other species, over a long period of time, their communication system evolves. And what we have here is in a very short time, we have a completely new ecosystem of communication of humanity. And is it given that it's so new, is it vulnerable to breakdown or possible disruption? Or do you feel like, we're pretty safe in assuming that there's not going to be a breakdown of any kind? I wonder sometimes what would happen if we had a scenario where the phone stopped working entirely for whatever reason. What would happen? What would happen to it? Because you now have people whose brains are wired to this new world. You and I are older, we remember a different world. But for the people whose brains are wired to this, hardwired to it now, it's like a 12-year-old understands the internet better than a 50-year-old, just because it's just a new language is all it is. And as you know, the younger you are, the easier it is to absorb a new language. That's called hardwiring. Done younger, better. The younger, the better that's done. That's like with mathematicians. It's earlier is better, usually. What happens is society vulnerable, or you're not concerned about that perhaps, or maybe you are, or have you given that thought?
Of course we're concerned about that, and we should be concerned, because think about what would happen if the internet went down and our society would collapse, don't you think?
I wrote a story about that called Satellite Pearl Harbor. And the idea, because 2/3 of our communications satellites are commercial, they're not hardened against electromagnetic pulse, nor are they hardened against laser, all the ASAT, anti-satellite technology among different world powers now, and even third-party actors. And I wondered if we're profoundly vulnerable. I don't want to take away from the accomplishments of the rise of this technology, by the way. I'm pro-technology. I just wonder, given how fast it's advanced and that it's an artificial ecosystem, totally artificial ecosystem that we've created through our intelligence. And I wonder if America is vulnerable to that. If the world is, we in particular are very vulnerable because we're more advanced than most other countries. Other countries are obviously advanced as well, but it's a handful of countries.
Well, you bring up a whole bunch of points, but let me start with the last one you made. The cell phone has advanced society in more profound ways in the emerging countries than it has in countries like the U.S. So if the cell systems went down in places like Africa, India, Mexico, it would be an ultimate disaster. If the internet went down, the society as a whole would collapse. We have just what you said, we've become so dependent on it. And so for that reason, we have made these systems very robust. It's a scary thing to think about what would happen if countries started to use that as a weapon. And it's almost like the idea of nuclear weapons. If one country starts doing it, people fight back, and we would destroy the world. The same thing happens with the internet and with cellular communications. We have to build these systems so they're robust, so that parts of them fail. There are workarounds, and the only scary part is what I just mentioned, namely that countries will start using this as a weapon. And if you could imagine the Chinese deciding that they were going to destroy the internet only in the United States, that would be a disaster because, of course, we'd fight back and the world would collapse.
The premise of my story is that it can be done anonymously. That's what concerns me. This wouldn't be like an attack on Pearl Harbor. It could be done anonymously using lasers for unshielded satellites and so forth. We would not know who did it. We would not be able to ascertain who did it. And so I do kind of look at that as an important social issue. And it's great talking to somebody like you in particular, who the grandfather of it all, or the godfather of it all, however we want to put it. And I look at the future with it, and the thing that concerns me would be that it's a denial weapon. So, like your submarine, it's not really for offensive purposes. It's a denial weapon. It's to prevent ships from getting to port. Yep. It's to force ships to go out around. You deny the enemy what they need in terms of cargo and shipment and all that. But it's not necessarily like power projection like an aircraft carrier would be. So in any event, I just wondered, because I've given a lot of thought to the problem, but from what I can see, the thing that worries me the most is the satellite technology. 2/3 of our satellites could go down and we wouldn't know why it happened or how it happened. Some of the more military satellites, they're hardened against electromagnetic pulse and so forth, and I assume they're okay. I assume there's a lot of thought that's given to the military infrastructure in any event. But I'm a little more worried about the civilian.
I think it's a very important point that you bring out. The only resistance we have is that there are so many cell sites that if some cell sites break down, you still maintain communications. The same thing is true with the satellite. If you look at the latest systems that are going up, the ones that Elon Musk is putting out, there are going to be literally tens of thousands of satellites up there. And if you lose a few thousand, or even if you lose a third of the satellites, the system still functions. So there is still a hope that there are workarounds, that the system does have some robustness. But I would still think that that's something we have to worry a lot about.
I'm going to just switch tactics here for a moment and tell me a little bit about what tactics and thoughts that go into your engineering ideas.
That go into our engineering.
When you're engineering something, what are the tactics? What are the methodologies that you employ when you attack a new technological challenge?
Let me tell you that number one issue, and the way I express that in one sentence: technology is the application of science to create products and services that make people's lives better. So when you start out with a new technology, the first thing you think about is how is this going to make people live better, and not can we create something that's clever and interesting and technological. That's the worst thing an engineer can do, Lee, is to get so caught up in the technology they forget that the purpose of technology is to make us live better.
And you made that point early on when you said that police needed to get out of their cars and be able to talk to the people in their communities and build relationships. And the Walkie Talkie, the Motorola hand unit was the way to do that. So they weren't just in their cars, like you said. So that's a great answer.
Well, that was a superb question. I really want to. Every time you bring something up, you inspire me to blab, and we only have 15 minutes. But the first thing that I did when I got into the two-way radio business at Motorola was to put a two-way radio in my car. And every morning and every night as I go to work and come back, I'd be talking to other people on this network so I could experience what our customers experience, the human part of it, not the technological part. We were there to solve a human problem. Too many people today forget that. We've got this thing called 5G, which does nothing for people. And yet the carriers have persuaded us to spend a lot of extra money to get this technology, and it doesn't benefit us in any way at all. And yet,
why do you say that? I'm curious. Now that's a very interesting comment. So 5G, why is that?
Well, I have nothing against 5G. 5G will be very useful in the future for businesses that are running factories, for people that are doing business kinds of services. But there are 40% of our students do not have access to wireless internet. And you can't get an education today without wireless internet. So it seems to me we got our priorities wrong. That we ought to do 5G. I think that's really important. We also ought to take care of making sure that our students get educated. I think that's as important as taking care of businesses, don't you?
I do. I certainly agree with you there. Let me ask you this question, Marty. What does the future of your industry look like? And I assume wireless communications are here to stay in the future and in the future.
As I said before, Lee, we're early beginning. And I can talk about healthcare, where our healthcare system is really broken. It's not a healthcare system. It's a sick care system. We wait till people get sick and then we try to cure them. But it turns out that if you anticipate disease, if you can give somebody a physical examination every 30 seconds and catch diseases before they start, we could cure diseases before they ever happen and eliminate disease. And the only way to do that is to connect people to a computer, to a doctor, and measure things continuously. And that is what the future of medicine is going to be. We're going to eliminate disease.
Absolutely. And it's the actuarial tables that are the issue, because the bias is always toward, American medicine is awesome, but only after you're ill. The amount of prevention just we don't seem to, I look at the Asian cultures. I noticed that even the Census Bureau indicates that Asians live on average 8 years longer in the United States than any other group. Now, part of that is the fish, and part of that is the tea. Part of that is the cultural resistance to processed foods and so forth. And the other pieces of, the downsides of technology that also come with mass food production and so forth. And so I look at these issues and anyway, I find that interesting. I want to ask you another question. First of all, I want to know if there's anything I've missed that we should have mentioned.
Well, I just want to add to this issue of healthcare. The cell phone also is revolutionizing education. We found that out with COVID, that we can give people an educational process that doesn't require them to go to school all the time. They can still interact with other students, and they can do this at home. They can have access to the total internet. The whole concept of what a teacher is and what a student is going to be changed just because people are connected. So the cell phone is going to revolutionize education as well as healthcare. And the biggest thing the cell phone does is, we've already covered before, is this issue of collaboration, that we could get people working together wherever they are, anytime. And that alone, the concept of having a meeting in an office doesn't mean anything anymore.
No.
You have people all over the world collaborating at the same time, just like you and I are doing right now.
And, it's like when in the pandemic, people, there's been a significant rise in homeschooling, and there's a lot of coordination between parents on setting better standards for making that happen, because those kids perform better than the ones that have been going into the public school system.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, I think it's up to over almost 12% of kids now are homeschooled. And before the pandemic, I think it was like 3%. It wasn't a big number. And the technology is allowing parents to coordinate, not only that, but for social, clubs and so forth for the kids that are homeschooled. And some of them, as you say, are just an alternative to the classroom experience. So
it's going to take a while for these things to happen. We are learning how to do this, and society as a whole benefit. In fact, I just published a book in January. The title of it is Cutting the Cord. And the subtitle is The Cell Phone Has Transformed Humanity. And I really believe that's the case, that we are doing things more efficiently. We are in the process of eliminating poverty because we're being more efficient. We are going to, in a few generations, not going to happen instantly, eliminate disease.
Yes,
and we're going to revolutionize the educational system, and all because we are connecting people.
And of course, when you have a crisis causes people to rely on the technologies in ways they wouldn't have before, and it moves the ball faster. So the pandemic helped move the ball on a lot of issues with regard to communication and collaboration online. That's pretty damn special. Let me ask you one last question I got for you is, tell me about do you have any hobbies that? You have a favorite hobby?
I dabble in a whole bunch of stuff. Right now,
I'm not shocked by that.
My biggest hobby right now, Lee, is staying alive. As you already know, I'm 92 years old.
What? Did I just hear you correct?
You just heard me right.
You got a better hairline than me. Nature's not fair.
Yeah, but I've worked very hard at it, because you started out our conversation talking about people living better and more healthfully. And I've been working on that. I started getting involved in it, thank goodness, in my early 40s. I was a runner. I can't run anymore, but I am an aggressive swimmer now. So you really have to maintain all of your muscles. You have to maintain your thinking ability. That's what you do. I know you're not running this podcast to become a millionaire. You're doing it because you're providing a service to society, and it keeps your mind active. You're talking to a lot of interesting people. So
I am.
You have to keep your mind active. You have to keep your body active. And you said that before, you have to learn how to eat properly. And the issue is not living a long time, it's having a long, productive life. So
Marty, listen, can I schedule another interview with you about health issues?
Sure, anytime.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Motorola is pretty cool, but I don't know. 93, you're talking circles around me, my friend. That's pretty good. 93.
One of my beliefs, Lee, is that everything in the world is connected to everything else. You can't do anything all by itself. You have to somehow, I'm just saying goodbye to my wife who's going to work. You have to consider every aspect of life. And so health is important, but the most important thing in life is learning. It is continuously being curious, keeping your mind active, because the more you learn, the more you can do, and you never get tired of it. Think about it. Earning money is important, of course, but getting more money is not going to keep you satisfied. At some point, the amount of money that you get, you could only buy so many things. You could only get so much satisfaction. You never get tired of learning. And that is the most important thing as far as aging is concerned. And this is statistical. Learning, and the second thing is relationships. Between those two things, those are the most important things in longevity. And there are a whole bunch of factors after that, including what you just mentioned about health. You got to do it all. You can't just pick one area and expect to benefit from it.
So perhaps another interview.
Anytime.
So let's go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and repeat all your contact information so that people have this information, and start with your book again.
Yeah, the name of my book is Cutting the Cord, How the Cell Phone Has Transformed Humanity. You can get it at your bookstore, at Amazon, at Goodreads. And you can email me at marty@delmarca.com. I live in Del Mar, California, which is a wonderful city. So it's marty@delmarca.com or mcooper@delmarca.com. And if you send me an email, I'd be happy to respond.
Marty, I want to thank you for your time today.